What we're planning to cover today, we're actually going to hope that when you leave, you're able to answer these three questions. Why is a customer strategy so important for product development? The word customer strategy may mean a lot of different things, so we'll talk about some definitions. But and then also on the opposite side of that, what does it mean for you, your company, your team, if you don't have one? Who's responsible for developing customer strategy, and what are some anti-patterns that we look for when this might be ineffective, or why we're feeling the voids that we feel in our day-to-day? We're about to go into breakout rooms. When we go into those breakout rooms, you'll have about 5 minutes. There will be about 5 or 6 of you in there as we're getting this set up, and it will be randomized. You really want to have a dialogue around what is one positive thing that you or your team or someone that you work with does to bring good customer insights. How do these insights manifest into the product or something that you deliver? And then where might your team or company grow in delivering to the customer? So Holly Davies, what did your group have to say?
I felt that call out coming. So my internet went out. So I don't know if I'm going to be the best person to call on from my group, but for the last 2 minutes, I can tell you, it was me sharing. So I work for Skookum. So being a services company, I don't know how relatable I'm going to be, but I'm actually a client manager. So I interact with customers all day long. And there was another individual from a services company. So we just talked about how important it was to create like a constant one-on-one with customers and ensure that communication and that door was always open and to keep it really regular. So I do a lot of one-on-ones with my customers, a lot of them, and I'm usually on site with my customers most every day. So yeah, and Skookum being a customer experience company, it's one of our rocks. So tracking it is really important to us.
Perfect. Eric with a double A. Is there anything that stuck out to you in the conversation, or did you happen to be in Holly's group?
I was not in Holly's group, but I had the same role as Holly. But we had a great little conversation. We got to the first question, so we were pretty deliberate with that one. But we had a J, so Jenny led us, right? So we had to go from C all the way to J. That was surprising. But we had some good insights. So there was I think Jenny works for a marketing tech company. And then we had a couple Skookum product designers, product strategists, and then another participant who works with a lot of like hotel brands. But great insights in terms of, what the product strategy and design teams were doing in terms of trying to define that customer. And then Jenny, she contributed, like, their platform pulls a lot of analytics, from people that are visiting the sites and so on and so forth, and using, social to really try to like identify who that customer is, what trends they're talking about, and then using some of the same tools that I use, right? Like those investor relations, 10Ks, to really help, when I'm narrowing in on a target company, using that type of information. Good stuff.
Thanks, Eric. And then did anybody, with a show of hands or use the little emojicon that Zoom gives you, anybody get to the question or talk about areas in which they could improve when it comes to bringing in customer insights?
Yeah, we talked about the importance of immersion techniques, actually getting into the customer's environment and using journey mapping, even process mapping to frame a visual that customers can react to. And I think the positive thing we walked away with is when you do those techniques, you literally get the voice of the customer documented in the workshop or in the meeting, on the visual itself. So it gives you some good takeaways to go back and design new products based off of.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Jeff. And we will talk about techniques just like that too.
Great.
James, anything call out you want to cover before we move on?
Yeah, we had some good conversation in ours and about the product owner reaching out and that eye-opening moment. I think a trend we saw in ours was very much around needing to dig deeper with customers. You'll get the surface thing, but often customers don't necessarily even know what they want. And you need quite a engaged and prolonged conversation to really get in there and sometimes recognize and realize information that weren't even aware of going into that first interaction. So trying to add depth is such an important part of a customer relationship.
Perfect. All right, so we'll move back up. A lot of what we're talking about here is what is the customer strategy and how can that help us out? So, but let's look at definitions real quick. So one of the words that we use there is strategy. And what is that? And if we were to look up what the dictionary tells us, it's just a plan of action or policy designed to achieve major or overall aim. I think we've probably see a lot of times when we're trying to build something that if we go with the base definition of anything, it doesn't really give us enough context to say, how can that service our organization, our goals, anything else? There's a book out there called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy that does reference a lot within competitive strategy, but I do like this definition a little bit more, saying that a good strategy more specifically is a coherent mix of policy and actions. And Richard Rumlett describes this into three main parts: coherent actions, diagnosis, and guiding policies. Too often we get into what is strategy or what is strategic and what is tactical. And we think that the strategy can't talk about the actions that need to occur. And if we look at our company's mission statements and goals, we start to see a lot of vagueness seeming across. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is we've learned about these frameworks that talk about these events and these activities that we can go through, but is that enough beyond just their intention? James, you want to talk a little bit more about customers here?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the conversations Dave and I had around this definition of strategy was just how you can take that sort of diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent actions and think about it with sort of especially agile product development. And the diagnosis, obviously, we talk a lot about sort of customer discovery, whether that's immersion techniques and outreach and how exactly we're doing that. But actually discovering what it is we're trying to solve here, what the problem is, what the pain points are. And then the guiding policy being often around the principles of agility, and then the actions. And we talked there about the actual capabilities that you have, but also your team has, what you're able to do with your business. And one side of this as well was to also remember that we talk about customers a lot, and it's very easy to think about the obvious products that we use and customers being sort of out there, the other. But often customers are the internal users in your business, and that's who you're actually developing a product for. But a really great way to emphasize of it is remember that we're customers ourselves, obviously in the products that we use, but in an organization, HR almost is treating you as a customer. You are a resource that they need to make sure is doing well, it gets your needs satisfied, and is trying to provide processes, potentially products that make you happy as a member of that organization. And it's a good way of flipping it sometimes in your head, just to try and think about how you feel as a customer. Do you feel listened to? Do you feel heard? Do you feel people are reaching out to you? And if you don't, then it's a nice way to start thinking about, well, am I therefore empathizing with my customers and whether they feel heard, whether they feel listened to, whether I'm really hearing what their pain points are and trying to respond to that. So I think definitely for our definition of customer, it can be quite broad, and you definitely need to think about the situation and sometimes even completely switch up the conversation just to try and get that beginner's mindset and think outside the box a little bit.
Thanks for that. So we're going to look at a pretty large company. This, if you go to their website today, is what they have for their growth strategy. But we want to look at it, we want to change our lens, and we want to say, as a customer of this, because I guarantee you, at least 90% of the people today on this call has gone through and ordered something from this company before. So reading through it, what is something, and take yourself off mute and speak up, that catches your eye? And this is their consumer-facing website.
It's extremely generic. It tells me nothing about what the company does or why they exist.
So you're not able to pull what actions they're going to perform to increase any of these things, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's something about some food, but I mean, it doesn't seem to differentiate themselves. And growing is not a strategy, it's an outcome.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Anybody else?
It looks outdated. It starts with March of 2017. So I don't know why you start with a date, but yeah, it does feel a little bit dated at this point, about 3 years old.
Yeah, great call out. And honestly, like that's my eyes really moved on to like, the big bold words and started to see what that means. I'll go ahead and jump into a couple things. Is as a customer, conversion rates that doesn't really appeal to me. What that says to me as someone that may buy these goods or services, I potentially have longer lines to stand in, or maybe this level of growth may diminish my experience in this storefront. What does it mean to reshape our interactions digitally with the customer? I'm still confused by that. So these are examples that we're going to pop in here to say, we probably have these within our company, but how intentional did we look at it, not from the lens of an employee, but from the person we're servicing? Anybody familiar with what a layout like this is? You can just do raise of hands. There we go. Yeah. Anybody built a persona before? Whether it's for an end user or a customer? This is a common practice that we see, especially in the last 5 years. But what it really is for us is a collection of assumptions. How often, and this, just think to yourself, how often do you, your team, someone you work with, put together a persona and then validate some of these assumptions? James, anything to add here?
Yeah, going on from that, actually, I think that's, in my experience, is one of the things that's always a bit sad, really, when you come into a company and you find that folder of personas and you think, oh, this is awesome, it tells me everything about my customers, and then you realize it's 5 years old or 3 years old, and wait, has anyone spoken to a customer again since then? Or maybe they have, and that's now in a different folder of new customer personas. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of Miro that we're using here as well, but I love the idea of these personas being living documents. And recognizing that your customers change, their roles change, especially when you work with internal users. It's very easy last year to say this is what they think and feel. And then by next year, after organizational changes have happened and their roles and responsibilities have changed, you're still saying the same thing. And so I think they're really valuable, but you have to remember that it's a snapshot in time. You're making assumptions. And ultimately, the best way is all these documents that we create and artifacts that we create as part of our sort of toolkit to further our product need to be things that we are continuously enriching and deepening and keeping them live. And also that allows us to stay simple rather than amassing an entire tome of artifacts that you're never, ever going to go back through.
Yeah. The last point I'll have here about personas too is this persona may change every time you do, if you're in software, a release to production. Something may have changed about your customer, but how often do we think of this as documentation like we do code documentation? So James, can you take it from there? Yeah,
so I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent here. So at the moment, I'm temporarily unemployed, which is great in some ways. So I do get the opportunity to reread some books that had a powerful impact on the way I think. And I thought this would be a good time to sort of do that sort of reflection. And one of these books I thought was really useful here. It's this book by Sudhir Venkatesh. He's currently a professor of sociology and African American studies at Columbia University. And he wrote this when to talk about his experience as a sociology grad when he was in Chicago. And he was sent out to go and basically do some research, some questionnaires to understand one of the most notorious housing estates in Chicago. And went out there, was promptly taken hostage on his pretty much first foray into the housing estate. And actually the next day came back to ask better questions and ended up spending 7 years living in the area with sort of unparalleled access to a gang known as the Black Kings. And the reason I bring this up is, in fact, I'm going to tell you this quick quote here, which is, it's written by Stephen Dubner, who's the co-author of Freakonomics, and he included lots of Sudhir's thoughts in Freakonomics. And I'll just read this out. The stories he tells are far stranger than fiction, and they are also more forceful, heartbreaking, and hilarious. Along the way, he paints a unique portrait of the kind of neighborhood that is badly misrepresented, when it is represented at all. He brought the perspective of an outsider and came away with an insider's access. A lot of writing about the poor tends to reduce living, breathing, joking, struggling, sensual, moral human beings to dupes who are shoved about by invisible forces. And that really struck me rereading this book, that a huge amount of our customer research is exactly that. We're trying to simplify what is a complex situation. And what we do is we reduce these down, a bit like economics is often critiqued for trying to create these sort of idealized people that respond to rational forces, and people are anything but rational, often act irrationally. And to what extent do we potentially do this with customers sometimes, trying to oversimplify, trying to make it simple and clean it up by giving this sort of moderated version of who we are serving? And to what extent does that actually miss some of the complexity, the customization that we can really offer to customers with our products? So I really like that. So that for me made me really think, and I wanted to sort of use that to lead into thinking about the way that we speak to customers and sort of trying to get into more depth there. And just making, what's the next one? So we were going to go on to now having a quick think about how well we know our customers. So David, do you want to quickly introduce this activity?
Yeah, so this is something we won't sit here on. James, I'm going to give you your input. We probably need to push the pace a little bit, but
okay.
Use the chat, and instead of using a 1 through 10 metric, grab the letter that you think is closest representation of where you and your teams understand your customer today. Understanding that just because you interacted with them once may not mean that you know the full diverse areas of each customer segment. And so use the chat, throw in the letter, and we'll move on from there.
Yeah, and I always love this. Sometimes when you speak to teams about customers and they respond by saying, yeah, I've spoken to a customer once a while back. And I mean, all of us aim to speak to customers regularly, but it is interesting how quickly you can get to months or even a year since you've spoken to a customer, the actual customer, as opposed to a proxy. I sort of turned having read that book, I sort of created an infographic, which David will show in a minute, and tried to sort of reflect on it in terms of how we approach customers in an agile way, and coming back to sort of those empirical values of Scrum: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Because a lot of this is about being maybe more touchy-feely, more empathetic, but it all comes down to being very systematic in our investigation of customers. And how we do that is through Scrum, through Agile, for a lot of us in product development. And one of the first things of that is transparency. And we say that a lot, but transparency is not just about saying what we know, it's also about what we don't know, and being very honest and authentic about that, recognizing, as we said, bias and assumptions. And one of the big things I've seen as well is often not necessarily telling the whole story to our stakeholders, but if you really want the buy-in, you really want stakeholders to recognize how important it is to get out to customers, you have to talk about what you don't know and what you need to find out to really make your product impactful. And also inspection. The one note I'll make there is around the idea that friction can be a good thing. And sometimes we stop those debates, or when things get a little bit heated a bit too early, when actually that's where friction can lead to a little bit more authenticity and potentially challenge the status quo, and potentially lead to actually some out of the box thinking and a different way of doing it. Like thinking, well, what if we did things completely opposite? And then adapting. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard these principles to death, but really internalizing what customers are saying and being able to adapt there, I think, is so important. And often we all live in our echo chambers and have our sort of cognitive bias, and our when we hear things that sounds like what I wanted to hear, and it's very hard sometimes to recognize that maybe you're not hearing the things that aren't going so well and adapting to them. So I think now, David, do you want to go back to the basics? I think is what we're going to do next.
Yeah, before we go there, I just want to show, this is what we're showing, kind of a quick heat map, which is good. I mean, what this shows is, hey, there's still more to learn about our customer, which is always a great thing, because a lot of the leaders in the product management world recognize and share very often that the moment you think you know as much as your customer does, you're going to fall behind real quick. And so you need to keep and maintain this mentality of, of almost, starting over again. Every time you change products, companies, roles, teams, you probably need to reflect a little bit and say, what do I have yet to learn about my customer today? So going back to the basics, and we can't really talk about this space too much without talking about, one of the foundational frameworks and then the Agile Manifesto itself. One of the fun things to call out here is this doesn't tell us everything we need to know, especially when it comes to our customer. So when we talk about individuals and interactions, how we talk about them is up to our organization to figure out. And then when we're talking about what is working software, what does that mean? What does it tell us? We have the ability to get creative there. When it comes to how we collaborate with our customer and how we respond to change, that's something else that falls on the organization, our teams, our leadership to help us work through as well. When we're looking at Scrum, there's a lot of times we'll lean on two of the legs of the stool, but there might be one area that's missing, and that comes with those interactions as well. I will call out too, if you pull up the Scrum guide, not very long, 16 and 19 pages, depending if you're including the table of contents or not, and you search, just keyword search the word customer, you're not going to find it once. You will find stakeholder 7 times. And I don't know if that's intentional or not, but I would imagine that since there is that space there, we may want to get a little bit more creative with how we collaborate and how we pull information from the person that ultimately is the one that's buying and funding our services and goods. The other thing is there's quick call outs in that same guide about the 4 events. And we may want to think outside our box to say, if it doesn't mention our customer once in one of those 4 events, what else are we doing to really push the pace there and really learn? You still designing, James?
No, I was just shifting things around. I just like to tweak. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out about a book I just read. It was published this year by Dana Publicover, who's actually based in South Carolina, I think. And she wrote this book called Empathy at Scale. And firstly, it's awesome. It's a really accessible read, some great practical suggestions. So I really encourage you to read that. And 2 of the key takeaways that I took from this that I want to focus on is recognizing the danger imperatives from stakeholders. One of seeing back to that poll there, that a few people, it is that sort of, I've spoken to customers once, or only one person goes to speak to the customer. Or even worse, it's I'm not allowed to speak to the customer, they're too busy, I'm allowed to speak to their manager. And I think it's so important to recognize, especially if you're in sort of product manager or product owner or product manager, that part of your role is not just to speak well to customers and find out great customer insights, but it's also to really convince those above you who maybe don't necessarily understand product management as well as you, why speaking to customers is so important, why a proxy will not do the same, why, we've all seen it, managers are great, but often don't really have a clue what's going on the ground. So it's important to actually speak to the customer themselves. And the other one I really liked was recognizing initial solutions as ghosts of the final products they become. It's definitely something, the more freedom you're given to actually really design and take your product forward, the more scary it is that you could take it forward in the wrong direction. And I think that's one of the things I love about a really solid customer strategy is that it takes a lot of that fear out of it if you know that you're basing your decisions on real solid customer insights, that this is what a customer's going to want, as opposed to you've made the assumption and you sort of know, but you still haven't quite got out there to validate it. And now it's going to be on you by the time it gets there to release to find out if they like it or not. And that's obviously one of the reasons why we move away from the waterfall methodology towards Agile, is to avoid that horrible shock when you finally release it to customers and deliver it. David, did you want to talk about anything there, or should I go straight on to?
Straight on.
So I then took something from that book, Empathy at Scale, and created a little infographic that I'll throw it up on LinkedIn at some point about how to become empathetic. So this is based on 8 points that Dana talked about. And in particular, I just wanted to focus on the sort of interactions and listening. I've heard it a couple of times already today around sort of the product owner goes out and gets in touch with the customers and then brings back those customer insights. And I think it's really important, getting down to a real practical level here, not to miss out on leveraging the rest of your team. Firstly, the rest of your team are there developing with you, and it's important for them to see the end result of that, the customers actually using the product. It helps developers, for example, really see what does go well and doesn't go well and have that impact so they know why. It's to give them purpose, coming back to sort of the Dan Pink idea of what drives us is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It gives you purpose to know this is the impact I'm having on customers. But more than that, when you're talking to anyone and you're having a conversation, it's really hard to ask the right questions, to hear what they're saying, to internalize everything they're saying, to notice their body language, notice the language they're using, and bring all that information back and actually respond to it. And effectively, the more people you have with you, the more ears you have, the more likely you're going to hear what it is that's being said. And if you want to delve into this idea of conversation design, I want to do another shout out here to the Conversation Factory, which is led by a person called Daniel Stillman, which has some absolutely incredible podcasts about conversation design and how important conversations are to our world of product development. The latest one was with Ron J. Williams. And there's a quote there: "Every pixel a company makes is an opportunity for them to listen to their customers and not just to be pushing their product out into the world." So I'll just finish with the last one. Like, to ask the right questions and truly hear everything your customer is saying, it requires people skills, listening skills, observational skills, empathy skills, as much as it requires the skills that a product owner has honed and brings with their experience. The more people you have there, the more likely you're going to hear the different perspectives and what was said. And I've seen some awesome examples of interviews where one person's asking a question and another two or three have predetermined areas that they're listening out for. And maybe one of them is literally there just watching the body language, watching what's not being said. And, when they're looking uncomfortable, when they're looking like, I'm not really interested in this and bored. And that might tell you much more than their potentially canned responses that a customer is giving you during an interview. Anything you want to add on to that? There's obviously a lot more information there. I will be trying to put this sort of stuff out there, but I wanted to focus on that.
Thanks, James. A lot of what James shared was around how to use empathy, especially if you're well equipped with empathy. And if anybody spent more than 7 minutes with me, I don't think that's what they would use to describe me, empathetic. But it still can be a powerful tool that someone uses. And this is actually, shout out to Corey Smith and Sarah Moore on the call. We've been doing a lot of strength finders assessments to identify like structures of the teams that we're building to be able to accomplish certain tasks or commitments. And these are my strengths and how they lie. I'm strategic right at the top. Command. I know how to use my voice in a way, I guess. I try not to give too much credit to my time in the military. This is another one that I have to give them. Ryan Crabtree heard the other one. It was the early mornings. Self-assurance. Usually when people describe me, they don't use this nice of a term. And then woo, that actually stands for winning others over. So I guess influencing is one of the top buckets. But if you look at all the way down, and there's only 34 strengths. If there were 134, it would probably still be at the bottom, is empathy. But that doesn't mean it can't be a tool in my toolbox. And if you look at the graph at the top, most of those blue relationship building items are towards the back end. So I guess I'm really bad at either making friends or keeping friends, but that's okay. But it's fun because I had a conversation recently because they said, you know what, you know how to leverage empathy, even though that's not necessarily a personality trait people would say. And what I said to them is I'm kind of like the Dexter of the Agile world out there. I show up to work and I know what I need to say to be able to deliver value to other people, even though I may or may not feel those exact things myself. They're still very important. And so using empathy, using all of the personality traits as a tool in the toolbox to be able to hone your craft is very important, whether you feel like you have it or not.
I think this is where we come back to our customer strategy has to be systematic as well. You have to think about the way we're approaching this. And being systematic is not trying to be good at absolutely everything. It's recognizing what's important, who in your team brings that skill and leveraging them. And firstly, it is a skill that can be built. That's what I love about Dana's book is Empathy at Scale. Is it talks about the idea of actually really growing your empathy skills. We've all been there where it's like, I don't want to speak to people, or I don't particularly like presenting or talking in public. And you realize after doing it once, twice, 10 times, 20 times, how much more comfortable you get, how much more you enjoy it. Empathy is a skill just like that. But it's also something that within your team, recognize the different personality you have beyond just their technical skills, because some people might be really good at noticing what others don't notice. And you want to leverage that.
Nice. We showed a persona earlier. Anybody have done an empathy map or an empathy mapping session before? Raise your hands. Another tool in the toolbox. Just like the other one, whether you figured out they have too many cats or not, it becomes stagnant. If you don't treat this as a list of assumptions to then validate to say, hey, do we really know who we're working with here and why we're delivering them something? I won't belabor that one too much. This is another quick call out. Back in 2010, Starbucks published, they didn't publish it then, but in their case study they did, their experience map. And the amount of due diligence and the amount of stores that they went to just to observe their customers' interaction with their product and their services and how much this may have changed. And so words may be small. If you need me to send this out afterwards, you can also just Google it pretty quickly. But I think it's important that teams that say, hey, how do we enrich the customer's experience, that they was part of not only visiting as many Starbucks stores as possible, but even competitors. How are the people that aren't going to Starbucks for their caffeine high? Why are they going somewhere else? What are they looking for? What do they need in their day-to-day? How is this their release or their come together with someone to have a conversation about what?
And what I like about this, especially the bottom half is there, the touch points, is very indicative of the user journey maps that have been more traditional potentially than the experience maps. And they're very descriptive, and you often need to start with the user journey map, but the richness that's provided by thinking about the emotions, the way that people feel going through those touch points is what really helps you understand how do we improve this experience for a customer. And it's hard if you don't do an experience map to be looking at a user journey map, maybe being just the one dissenting voice going, yeah, I know this is how it works, or this is what the flow we want the customer to go through, but going from there to there sucks. Like that is painful. It's horrible for the customers. But if that's only ever spoken and it's not recorded, there's no visual to really bring home that point, you often miss the real point where you could add something like a woo moment, a time to really get that customer on board and win that customer.
Yeah, and James, to build upon that, like sometimes the employees of the company have a bias towards not slandering their company. And so sometimes they don't want to say the transition from A to B sucks. And that's not doing anybody any good. Yeah, it's not doing anybody any good. I want to call it this one. When someone comes there to work, one of the first things to do is I place my drink on the table next to me and I place my bag on the floor, understanding where they're putting their other items. What does that change? Well, that could be as easy as maybe we put some hooks underneath our tables. It gives you valuable insights to take forward. This is another company out there today. Go to their website, and what you'll see from their mission statement is to create a shopping experience that pleases our customers, a workplace that creates opportunities for a great working environment, and our associates, a business that achieves financial success. And so we're changing our lens here because sometimes our customers are the people that work left and right to us. What does this say to them? If you want to come off mute, come off mute. I'm just going to pull some of these that we captured beforehand, but what business are we in? What is our core competency? What are we trying to achieve here? How are we going to achieve that? But this is strategic. Okay. As an employee, what am I looking forward to? And do we even understand our business model? I will call out one from about 100 years ago. And this is Henry Ford's Model T vision statement for the Model T. And what I want to share here are some quick thoughts. And actually, let's use a little pen to move faster. I want to build the motor car. It doesn't say what kind. for the great magnitude. All right, still pretty vague. It'll be large enough for the family. Start to get a little bit more detail. Small enough for the individual. Okay, I'm getting closer. All my lines are getting crazy here. Thanks, James. Take smart drawing off. It'll be constructed of the best materials. Now we're talking about operationally for men to be hired and the simplest design that modern engineering can devise. All right, getting there. It'll be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one. Now I'm starting to learn more. Now I'm starting to look at customer segmentation or even non-customer segmentation to think out there. There's some people that I don't want to buy my product. This is not for them. And enjoy with the family and the blessing of ours and the pleasures of God's open spaces. So what they're going to be doing with my product is built in here as well. So in just a few words, not so worried about how many buzzwords I can put in here, I know a little bit more about my customer just from the vision statement for the product I'm going to deliver. Another thing we want to call out too, because one of the questions we said we want you to be equipped with before you leave is whose responsibility is it to think this way, to impact all of the artifacts and documentation that's within your area. And it falls on all levels. Our customers are going to our consumer-facing websites and they want to see what we're all about. We probably want to say something to them. Our teams that are coming together and building products, they're focused on, how can they stay aligned to the mission statement? And how can they make sure that their products and services are delivering in that same direction? As individuals, what am I doing to not only influence the team, the people that work left and right to me, but the entire organization as a whole? And so one quick call out here is Tuckman's model. We talk a lot about it, especially when we're talking about team development, but understand that this is also important when we talk about personal development. How often do you take on a new role or a new set of responsibilities and you go into a storming phase yourself? And what I mean by this is you start to challenge everything that you used to know about business. And you say, you know what are these new guiding principles? What is this agile thing? I've been doing project management so great for so long. And so we're starting to try and combine the two and we get friction and it isn't necessarily working all the time. But then we find balance. Maybe we throw some things away. Maybe we pick up some new and we start to norm ourselves. But then that's when we're on the uphill climb to performance. And no matter what the industry, no matter what the product or the service, we're able to apply our knowledge base to it. And so if you take a moment and say, where am I at? And if I try to speed through storming as quickly as possible, do I ever revisit it? And is that healthy? Why is it important? And this is not just talking about a mission statement or your goals or a go-to-market strategy. This is talking about everything that you produce. Who's responsible for it? And what anti-patterns to look out for? We talked a lot about stagnant artifacts.